Welcome back to Renewing Hope. Phone lines are open for questions to our guest at 877-573-7825. That's 877-573-7825.
Welcome back, and you're listening to Renewing Hope on Ave Maria Radio. Today I'm joined by Dr. Charles Wadley, board-certified addiction physician, and we're discussing why people use drugs. I'm Mike Vasquez, your host on this journey, and are you one of the 3 Americans being impacted by substance abuse? Are you not really sure why you start or why you can't stop? Our conversation today is really going to delve into why do people use drugs, and we were just having a discussion earlier with a caller about a mother who seems to be distracted, and we've got a caller now. We thought we'd go to Steve in Iowa, actually, who's looking for some advice on to prevent his kids from using or drinking, and let's go to Steve on line 1.
Hi, thanks for your show. I just quick question: how do you keep your kids from experimenting with drugs? And then, I got a neighbor who thinks that their kids, my kids' age, which is kind of concerning, are starting to experiment. And so if you think they're starting to experiment, what should you do? And along the lines of your question, I've read that if your kids have like ADHD and things like that, they might be more prone to getting on drugs, and I don't know if that's true. So I guess I just want to get your advice on that.
Well, you got a couple things going on there, Steve. I appreciate your call today. First of all, if you're not praying, pray. That's one of the best things for prevention, I think, and for intervention even after the fact. There's several things you can do though with kids and hopefully abating or preventing their use. One is modeling it for them, and certainly trying to keep a clean life as a parent, and showing, as we talked about before, the ability to delay immediate gratification. The other thing is knowing your child the best you can, having a relationship with them, knowing who their friends are, and knowing where they're going and where they're going to be. In this day and age of constant communication, there's no reason we can't know where they are all the time and have that expectation. It's just common sense. Where are you going tonight, son, daughter, whatever? Leave me a phone number of the place you're going, who you're going to be with, not just their phone number in this cell phone age, but others they're going to be participating with. So limits and boundaries, having discussions with them about substance is also something you can readily do. Hopefully the prayer, that discussion, parenting them, those would be 3 key things to engage in.
Let me ask you a question though. Immediate gratification, and it seems like our culture today, that's what everybody expects, is immediate gratification. So how do you overcome that?
Well, I don't know if there's an easy answer for that other than modeling that in that example we talked about before. Even when they're little kids and they want something now and I got to have it now. You learn to set them in the corner. You learn to discipline them. You learn to say no. And you model that. Now it gets a little tougher when they hit in adolescence and they think they're autonomous and they know as much or more than their parents, and parents are always stupid until your kids hit about 25, then all of a sudden all the parents get smarter. But I think having that relationship with them can be key, and it's tough sometimes because you want to be you don't want to be too disciplinarian, but that's part of having a relationship, and that's part of setting limits and part of the boundaries. And most people desire structure. Letting them run free and do whatever they want because it feels good, that relativism, that's not real freedom. You're always succumbing to the next high, the next fun, the next fleeting pursuit of happiness. So set limits, set boundaries. That's perfectly okay, and even if they don't like it, all the more reason you need to.
One of the things that I was going to add, Steve, is at St. Gregory, one of the things we do is we want to be able to do 2 things: provide confirmation that you're being compliant with what we're trying to show you and teach you at St. Gregory, and we also try to deter you from not doing the right thing. And the way we do that is through drug testing. And it's interesting how that works. If you take that same example that we use every day at St. Gregory, and I know my kids will probably say it never worked with them, but I tried to give them a deterrent tool to allow them to have an out. So say, for example, that your son is in a back seat of a car and somebody spins around from the front seat and offers them the hit of a joint or hands them a beer, and they have the ability to say, you know what, I can't do it because my parents randomly drug tested. I don't want to lose my cell phone or lose my car. And so you're not doing it punitively. You're not trying to catch them. You're actually doing it as a benefit as they grow up to say, you know what, you're going to be put in these situations, and sometimes it's not cool because, again, at that age, they're looking for that peer acceptance. And it's an out that it gives them to say, you know what, those things are more important than that beer, and their friends will accept that as opposed to looking as if they just don't want to do it because they're not cool. And so it works well at St. Gregory in a treatment setting, but it's amazing how for some families that'll work, other kids will do it, or other families will do it, and it's not successful. And I won't tell you that we did it in our family, and who knows if it was successful, but hopefully it led some structure that they knew we cared enough to be trying those sort of things. So hopefully those ideas and our discussion help, Steve, with your, and thanks again for your question.
You know, Mike, there's nothing better than to have a parent you can blame to get you out of hot water with your peers and friends. Oh, yeah, I know your parents.
Boy, I was always
and
that parent. Yeah. So again, welcome back. You're listening to Renewing Hope on Ave Maria Radio, and we're discussing with board-certified addiction physician Dr. Charles Wadley. Are you one of 3 Americans being impacted by substance abuse? And, you know, Dr. Wadley, going back to Steve's question, it seems to be a great example. Don't we all mature as we get older?
Well, hopefully, again, as we were talking earlier, you know, it's not necessarily correlated with how many years are under your belt in the chronology. And as we talked with Steve and the others, setting examples and setting those limits and boundaries helps model those kinds of things. You know, that brings us to the concept of having these opportunities in developmental stages. We talked about the young child. Here there was a call about an adolescent. Consider that adolescent, as we've had in this discussion. You know, well, everybody else is doing it, why can't I? And I should be able to. It's a tough time. High school, you know, is a really tough time with the cliques of being popular, or if I don't do this, I'm not popular. And you hear this kickback from that age group of, you know, everybody's going to the game, the dance, the party. God, nobody has a curfew, Dad. That's ridiculous. Well, those are the kinds of limit setting you can model for them. And like I said, it's okay if they blame you. Yeah, my dad's silly, has a dumb curfew, and you guys don't, but I got to be home at a certain time. You know, but it's an opportunity they can learn to be different, to stand their ground, to reinforce a pursuit of joy instead of happiness, and delay that gratification, you know, over time. Now, happiness, as we talked, I mentioned before, it's fleeting, it's elusive, it's superficial. You know, joy has real depth. Some examples of that. You remember those old magazines before we had everything on the internet and you're reading everything on an iPad or something? You had that scratch and sniff. You know, I think of happiness as the scratch and sniff of that bouquet. So having that bouquet in front of you is the real joy. You know, happiness is the menu at the restaurant. Joy is the meal. Happiness is that community spirit in your parish or where you go to church. Joy, you know, for Catholics is the Mass, the physical presence of the Eucharist. There's nothing wrong with happiness, and, you know, enough repetitious quality happiness could lend to joy, but happiness itself is finite. We want the joy, which is the glimpse of the infinite, which we're all hopefully en route to experience someday.
Yeah, that's a great introduction. We've got Lou from Florida on the line, and he wants to talk about how do you actually introduce God in a secular world. So, Lou, you're talking to Dr. Wadley on Renewing Hope. Go ahead.
Hi, Doctor. How are you today?
Great. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. I'm listening, and you guys have talked about a lot of Catholic things that have to do, you know, with what you're talking about in terms of the addiction. But how do you speak to people who don't want to hear anything about that?
You know, I'll maybe just address that initially. Just from a St. Gregory aspect, what we do is only about 30% of our guests at St. Gregory are Catholic. And we face this, Lou, every day there because we have a lot of agnostic, atheists, Mormon, other Christian faiths who come at it exactly just from your question. And so it's interesting because as you become addicted to something, your virtues get buried, your morals, your ethics, and what happens is you start to pursue that drug or that artificial satisfaction with total disregard for the consequences, and that drug or that desire for that next hit really becomes your compass, your right and wrong indicator. And what we do is we actually introduce to people as the drugs come away, we introduce virtues in a format of right and wrong. So you now know what those virtues are, how they impact your life, not from a theological aspect, but then from just making the right decision and how they impact you as you try to go through life. Because as we said before, immaturity really is instant gratification, looking and very self-centered inward. However, is what we try to teach is, as you take the drugs away, to look for deferred gratification and outward. What are the impacts on what I'm doing on the people who care about me and those around me? And if I use virtues in those decision processes, and then they get a sense of how those evolve into, those are the same virtues that are given to us if you're Catholic, in the Catholic Catechism, or the same virtues given to you in most religions. It's very easy then at that point to understand the tie, and then it's up to them, because what we realized was at St. Gregory, we just had to get out of the way and let the Holy Spirit really take over from there, and it's they're on their journey. Our goal at St. Gregory is to give you 100% hope of recovery, and then you'll really dictate what your percentage of recovery is, because it'll be just to what you're alluding to in your call, is the fact that when do you introduce those virtues back into your life on making your decisions, and when you do, it's amazing the path that it'll take you on. So that's kind of the view from St. Gregory at a high level, and I don't know, Dr. Wadley, if you've got something.
Well, and I want to reiterate that. I mean, one of the attractions with St. Gregory's and some of the early work when I started there was seeing all the diversity. That's a great political word today, but the diversity in the religious folks that were coming. And you talk to these people who had been in multiple other treatments, and why are you coming here? Why aren't you going to more of a traditional? There's nothing wrong with AA and 12-step, but that's kind of what we think of the more of the traditional. And they say, I didn't like that religious stuff. But they come to us, and we don't do an in your face, but we don't apologize for what's there. I mean, we have nuns that are part of the staff. We have a priest that's part of the staff. We have the Eucharistic presence in the houses, condoned by our local bishop. So it's there, it's in front of them. We don't necessarily force it again, but we do, per your question, Lou, was how do we introduce God to a secular world? Well, that's one way of doing it, just being God-filled, if you will, and living your Catholic life and modeling. How many of the saints talked about, you don't necessarily go out to preach. You got to get that relationship for them. You got to feed them. You got to shelter them. And for St. Gregory's, we got to help with their treatment and guide them to something better. And usually they come along.
It's amazing when you see it. And again, we're a little unique. I'm sure we're the only treatment program in the U.S. that has the Blessed Sacrament. We have Mass in the houses every day, not for the guests. The guests have options to attend, but we pray for their recovery. So it's amazing that they're aware as they see nuns in habits walking down the hallways, priests in collars. They have Mass every day. And so if you're a Mormon, an atheist, or agnostic, it doesn't impact you, but to live in that environment in your recovery really just reintroduces that there's something going on here, and it's hard to not let your heart be touched by it. So it's something that we've seen over the years, and hopefully we'll continue to see. So thanks for your question, Lou, and we'll continue with our discussion. But again, you're listening to Renewing Hope on Ave Maria Radio. I'm your host, Mike Vasquez, joined today by Dr. Charles Wadley, board-certified addiction physician, and we're talking about why do people use drugs. If you or someone you know is struggling with substance abuse, needs help, give us a call, 877-573-7825. You can join our conversation here at 877-573-7825. So, Dr. Wadley, we've got a few minutes here before the next break, but how does the difference between happiness and joy relate to someone who is struggling with substance abuse?
Well, that fleeting, elusive aspect of happiness, lends to what I like to call the terrible D's. It's dissatisfaction with who or what we are, which we've talked about before. It's or dissatisfaction where we're going. We don't have a direction. There's another D, by the way. There's discouragement from challenges in our lives. It's easy to get overwhelmed. There's disappointment in ourselves, about us, our circumstances, and such culminates in despair and potential desolation. Again, I want to reiterate, we're talking today more about these psychosocial, spiritual explanations. These aren't particularly the biological explanations, which we'll reserve for another time.
Well, let's take a short break here. When we come back, we'll be discussing with my guest, board-certified addiction physician, Dr. Charles Wadley. Why do people take drugs, and what are the barriers to treatment? Are you one of the 3 people being impacted by substance abuse? Join our conversation at 877-573-7825. We'll be right back.